My name is John, and I'm 80 years old. Over the decades, I've learned that the most profound lessons in life often come from the simplest of places. While cleaning out an old attic, one rainy afternoon, I stumbled upon something I never expected. An old box tucked away and covered in dust. Inside were dozens of faded envelopes, their edges worn, each marked with my parents' names. I had no idea what I was about to uncover. As I opened the first letter, their handwriting brought them back to life. Their words seemed to leap off the page, full of love, hope, and an honesty that only time can preserve. These letters weren't just memories. They held lessons about resilience, about forgiveness, about what it truly means to love someone through life's highs and lows. Stay with me, because this isn't just a story about old letters. It's about the wisdom hidden within them, wisdom that may just change how you see your own relationships. It started with that box. The box was small, unassuming, and tucked into the corner of the attic, almost as if it had been waiting for me to find it. When I opened it, the faint smell of old paper filled the air, and there they were, dozens of love letters, carefully folded and tied with a faded ribbon. My parents' names were scrawled on each envelope, in handwriting I hadn't seen in decades. At first, I just stared at them, overwhelmed by the intimacy of it all. These weren't just pieces of paper. They were windows into a world I had never known. Their world before I even existed. With hesitant hands, I unfolded the first letter. The ink had faded, but their words were alive. My father wrote about their early days, the joy of stolen moments together, and the dreams they had for the future. My mother's responses were no less vivid, full of humor, warmth, and a fierce determination that I had always admired in her. Reading them was like stepping back in time. It was a glimpse of their love, in its purest and most honest form. But more than that, these letters began to reveal lessons, not just about their love for each other, but about life itself, about patience, forgiveness, and holding on to what matters, even when it's hard. I didn't know it then, but those letters would stay with me, long after I closed that box. The letters didn't just tell a story, they painted a picture. Each one was like a snapshot of their lives, moments frozen in time. The paper was soft and worn, the ink smudged in places, but the emotions, they were crystal clear. I remember one letter in particular. My father had written it during a hard season in their lives. He spoke about the challenges they were facing, financial struggles, uncertainty about the future. But through it all, his words were steady. No matter how difficult things get, he wrote, we'll find a way, because having you by my side makes everything feel possible. As I read those words, I could feel his strength, his resolve. It wasn't just love he was writing about, it was commitment, the kind of love that doesn't waver when things get hard. And then there was my mother's response. Her letter was filled with warmth, but it didn't shy away from their struggles. She spoke about the sacrifices they were making, but also about her gratitude for him, for their life together, for the hope they refused to let go of. Her words struck me deeply. Love isn't about avoiding hard times. It's about choosing each other through them. Those letters didn't just show me how much they loved each other. They showed me how they loved each other. With patience, with forgiveness, with an unwavering belief that together they could weather any storm. And as I read letter after letter, I realized something profound. Their love wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and that honesty made it beautiful. As I read more letters, I began to see patterns, not just in their words, but in their values. They wrote about the little things, the joy of a quiet Sunday morning, the laughter shared over an inside joke, the simple comfort of knowing someone was always there. But they also wrote about the hard things, the arguments, the misunderstandings, the moments when life pulled them in opposite directions. And yet, in every letter, they circled back to one truth: we're better together. One letter from my father stands out in particular. He admitted to making a mistake, something small but enough to cause a rift. He didn't defend himself or shift blame. Instead, he wrote, "I was wrong, and I'm sorry. I'll do better." It was so simple, yet so powerful. And my mother's response? It wasn't perfect forgiveness. It was honest. She wrote about how she felt hurt, but also how she appreciated his humility, his willingness to own up to his actions. She ended with a line that I've never forgotten. "Love isn't about being right. It's about growing together." That single exchange taught me more about relationships than any book ever could. It showed me that love isn't about perfection. It's about effort, about being willing to show up, even when it's messy, even when it's hard. Those letters weren't just a record of their love. They were a guide, a map for how to navigate the inevitable challenges of life and relationships. And as I read each one, I couldn't help but reflect on my own life, my own choices, and the relationships I had built. One letter in particular left a mark on me, a letter my mother wrote during one of the toughest times in their lives. She described a moment when everything seemed to be falling apart. The uncertainty of the future, the weight of responsibilities, and the sheer exhaustion of trying to hold everything together. But in the midst of her struggles, she wrote this: "Even when the world feels heavy, I remind myself to look for the light. It's there, in the way you hold my hand, in the laughter of our children, in the hope we create together." Her words stopped me in my tracks. She wasn't denying the hardships. They were real, and they hurt. But she chose to focus on what made life worth living. And my father's reply? It wasn't grand or poetic. It was simple and steady. "We'll get through this together." That exchange taught me something I carry with me to this day. Gratitude doesn't erase pain, but it makes the burden lighter. As I read those letters, I realized how often we let our struggles overshadow our blessings. We focus on what's missing, what's broken, instead of appreciating what's still here. My parents weren't immune to challenges. They faced plenty. But they refused to let those challenges define them. Their letters reminded me of something my grandmother used to say: "The burdens will always be there, but so will the blessings. The choice is yours." And in those letters, my parents made their choice. Every single time. They chose love. They chose resilience. They chose each other. As I sat there, surrounded by their words, I couldn't help but think about how rare it is to capture something so honest and raw. These weren't grand declarations of love. They were moments, small glimpses into the life they built together. One letter talked about a time when they barely had enough money to get by. My mother joked about stretching a single meal to last 2 days, while my father promised her they'd look back on those days and laugh. "We may not have much," he wrote, "but we have enough. Enough love, enough hope, and enough faith to keep going." And they did keep going. Through the struggles, the disagreements, and the uncertainties, they held on to that enough. That simple, unshakable belief in each other. What struck me most wasn't just the love they shared. It was the effort they put into protecting it. There was a letter where my father apologized for something he said during an argument. He admitted he had been impatient, and he asked for forgiveness, not because he felt obligated, but because he wanted to make things right. My mother's response was just as honest. She acknowledged her own role in the argument, but reassured him, "Every storm passes, and every time it does, we're stronger for it." Those letters weren't just exchanges between two people in love. They were reminders of what love requires: effort, patience, and a willingness to grow, even when it's hard. As I read through the last few letters, I began to reflect on my own relationships. How often had I let pride get in the way of apologizing? How many moments had I taken for granted because I was too focused on what wasn't perfect? Their letters made me realize that love isn't about getting everything right. It's about showing up, even when it's messy, even when it's hard. And as I closed the box that day, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of clarity, a renewed appreciation for the people in my life, and a deep understanding of what it means to truly love and be loved. Years later, I found myself sharing these letters with my own family. It was a quiet evening, much like the one when I first discovered the box. My daughter and her family were visiting, and as we sat together after dinner, I brought the letters out and began to tell their story. At first, they were curious, intrigued by the idea of uncovering something so personal from my parents' past. But as I read excerpts aloud, I noticed how their expressions changed. My granddaughter, barely a teenager, leaned forward, hanging on every word. My daughter wiped away a tear when I read my mother's line. Even when the world feels heavy, I remind myself to look for the light. These weren't just my parents' words anymore. They were universal truths. Lessons about love, resilience, and finding joy in the little things, no matter how difficult life becomes. Later that night, my granddaughter came up to me and said something I'll never forget. "Grandpa, do you think they ever got scared?" I paused for a moment before answering. "Of course they did," I said. "But they didn't let that fear stop them. They faced it. Together." She smiled, then asked, "Do you think love like that still exists?" Her question stayed with me long after she'd gone to bed. It made me realize how much the world has changed since my parents' time, and yet how much their lessons still matter. Those letters weren't just a glimpse into the past. They were a reminder of what we should be striving for in our relationships today: patience, forgiveness, gratitude, the kind of love that isn't distracted by what's fleeting, but grounded in what lasts. As I reflected on my parents' story, I realized that their love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about choosing each other every single day. And that's a lesson that will never go out of style. As I sit here now, decades after finding those letters, I realize just how much they've shaped the way I see life and love. My parents weren't perfect. Their love wasn't flawless, but it was real. It was honest. It was intentional. And that's the lesson their letters left behind. Love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up. It's about forgiveness. About choosing to see the good in someone even when life feels heavy. It's about creating light in the darkest moments. Before I put the box away for the last time, I took out one final letter. It was from my father, written years into their marriage. In it, he wrote, "Through it all, I'd choose you again and again, because you're my greatest blessing." Those words have stayed with me ever since. They remind me that at the end of the day, life isn't about the burdens we carry. It's about the people who walk with us, the love we nurture, the connections we build. So let me leave you with this thought. When was the last time you chose to focus on your blessings? The next time life feels overwhelming, I encourage you to pause. Think about the people you love, the moments that bring you joy, the small, quiet blessings that often go unnoticed. Because the path you walk may not always be easy, but it's the love you carry with you that will make the journey worthwhile. Have you ever found something from your past, or your family's past, that changed the way you see the world? or a lesson that stayed with you, shaping the way you live. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your story in the comments below. It might inspire someone else to reflect on their own blessings. If you found value in this reflection, don't forget to like the video and share it with someone who might need a gentle reminder about what truly matters. And if you'd like more stories and timeless wisdom, subscribe to my channel, John the Stoic. Let's keep learning, growing, and finding meaning together.